In the book of Acts, in the 7th chapter, starting in the 22nd verse, we read this. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Now, many, no doubt, have spent many years of their life unconcerned for the things of God. And here we read about Moses, the future prophet of God, man God would use in a mighty way, and how he had spent the first 40 years of his life in maybe the vanity of the ways of the Egyptians, learning the ways of the Egyptians, and learned in all their ways, their wisdom, and the worldly things. But I thought how that God had something greater prepared for Moses later on in his life. But at this time he was 40 years old. It began to come into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. In Acts 7:25 says, For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. And so after killing the Egyptian, Moses fled from Egypt. And the Bible says that he went and dwelt in the land of Midian, and joined himself unto Jethro, the priest of Midian, and married his daughter. And he was in Midian another 40 years. And the Bible says that Moses was watching after the flocks of his father-in-law, Jethro, on the backside of the desert. Now by this time Moses was 80 years old, and no doubt he may have thought that his life was soon to be over, or soon to end. Of course, we know that God wasn't yet finished with Moses. But how many have come to such a time in their lives when they feel that too much time has passed, or they're now too old to be of any use to God's kingdom? Certainly it's much better to serve the Lord while we're young. Ecclesiastes 12:1 says, Remember now the Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. But if we turn to God with our whole heart, He is able to use us for His purpose regardless of our age. In Psalm 71, verse 9, Cast me not off in the time of old age, forsake me not when my strength faileth. Psalm 71:17 to 18. O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared thy wondrous works. Now also when I am grey-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have shewed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to every one that is to come. We may think sometimes that we're too old to do anything, or maybe too much time's gone by, or we've wasted so much time, and sometimes we do waste time, and sometimes we do let things pass us by. But I thought there's no substitute for true experience with God. No seminary or university could ever teach one the depth and meaning and wisdom of the lessons of time and a life spent serving the Lord. There's much to be learned from our elders in the Lord, and they have much to offer to a generation that seemingly has lost its way. No doubt Moses felt that his life was soon over, but the reality was that he was now to the point that he could truly live. He was 80 years old, living in exile on the backside of the desert. And there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush, according to Acts 7:30. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Now Moses was given a choice that day. He could have chosen to ignore the call, and went about his business attending the flocks of Jethro, his father-in-law. And I guess that would have been that. But instead he chose to turn aside from what he had been doing and to heed the call of God. And we see that when God saw that he turned aside, he called to him and used him mightily for the next 40 years to lead his people out of bondage in Egypt into the land that he had promised their fathers. And so now here was Moses, a man who had been brought up in Egypt, brought up as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, learned in the ways and wisdom and knowledge of the Egyptians, mighty in words and deeds according to the Bible, flees from Egypt, spends another 40 years of his life in exile, and here he is, a full 80 years old, and God's calling him to do a work. And from that time forward, Moses was a man who knew God as no other had before or since. In Exodus 33:11 we read, "And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend." In Deuteronomy 34, verses 10 to 12, "And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and the wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land, and in all that mighty hand, and in all the great terror which Moses shewed in the sight of all Israel." As long as we're in this life and we can hear the call of God, regardless of our age, regardless of our situation, as long as we're in this life and we can hear the call of God, there's hope if we'll heed that call, if we'll turn to him with our whole heart and do that he would bid us to do. Then we just might find out that the Lord's not done with us yet, that there's still something that he can do through us, that he can use us in a mighty way, in a way that would be pleasing to him. Ecclesiastes 9:4, "For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope." If you hear the call of God and you feel that God has something for you to do, now's the time. Today's the day. Turn to him with your whole heart and do that would be pleasing in his sight before it's too late.